Hey, friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the 4th of July edition, 2017, and I'm so glad that you have joined me, as is my custom, on a holiday week, especially the Monday holidays. This one's Tuesday. We're going with it. I like to do just a short episode, something that you can listen to if you're on your way somewhere. But that doesn't necessarily have an interview or is a full-on episode. We'll return to that next week. Have a great conversation for you, and it will be good. In the meantime, I wanted to share with you something since we're all thinking about freedom and America and some of the amazing things. I've become kind of a history buff. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with history. I've been listening to the audiobooks about every single U.S. president and the founders. And I tell you what, these guys, many of them were very amazing. They brought such an intellectual heft to the American Revolution, and there's a lot to talk about there. But something that I want to share with you is a book. I've mentioned it several times on the show because it was so influential to me. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I do this show right now. And so I thought maybe it would be interesting to you if I simply read to you my book review of this book that I wrote several years ago. This is back in 2013. I really, to be honest with you, it was the book that changed the way that I think. It started to change how I think about the way that Christians engage in certain aspects of our culture. And so today it's a quite different thing, and I'll tell you why. And then I guess I'm going to read my book review of this particular book. I used to think that what Christians really needed was someone to tell them, why what was happening on the political scene was important, or why it was important for them to think a certain way about politics, or to try to convince other people to think the way I did about politics. And we've seen a lot of that lately, or in the last, let's say, 40 years, about people trying to convince others to follow their own view politically, especially on the Christian side. There's a number of examples of conservative Christians being very influential with Republican governments, and this last election confused a lot of things with the current occupant of the White House. But I don't want to talk about that. My point is that evangelicals have been very involved in politics, and we used to think that the way to do things was to try to get laws passed. And I think we've seen over the last, let's say, 10 years or so, that laws can be swept away very quickly, and that maybe there's something deeper and more important that we should think about. So that's kind of where this is going. This is a review of the book A Free People's Suicide by Os Guinness. Now, Os Guinness, I'll tell you a little bit about him in here. He's a philosopher, but he's very insightful, and hopefully this doesn't go too far in the weeds. But I'm going to just read it to you, and you'll get a feel for the book. But this is the book that changed my approach to everything. Here it is. Conversations can haunt you. One that haunts me took place years ago in a park with a friend while our children played. He said that with the recent spat of political correctness, he did not think it would be long until it was used against the church in serious persecution. Shocked at the thought, I insisted that as long as we have the First Amendment, there was nothing to worry about. Call it the ghost of naivete past. Os Guinness's A Free People's Suicide, Sustainable Freedom and the American Future addresses exactly what my friend... Os Guinness's A Free People's Suicide, Sustainable Freedom and the American Future addresses exactly why my friend was right, I was wrong, and America is in trouble. I hate to admit all three. Two things are worth mentioning about Os Guinness at the outset. First, Guinness freely admits that he writes as an outsider observing America. He is from Ireland but now lives in the United States. He quotes often from Alexis de Tocqueville, and it is no stretch to say a free people's suicide is in the same tradition. Second, Guinness is a Christian writer and philosopher, but this not is not a book that is Christian per se. He will land on some ideas that are Christian and that all Christians will readily accept, but the book is intended for a larger audience. Guinness begins by explaining why freedom must be sustained. Our vaunted founders had the pluck to win and organize, second effort was better, the freedom they secured. But being mortal, they could only sustain it during their lifetimes. After that, it's up to each generation to maintain what they secured and organized. What does it mean to maintain liberty? More than just an oil change on your Jeep Liberty, perhaps. It's hard, uncomfortable, and widely misunderstood, and dangerous because it's under attack. Guinness brings back an understanding of freedom by defining what freedom meant to the founders. The misunderstandings about liberty are staggering in a culture that prides itself on preserving, promoting, and protecting that very thing. But the arguments have slowly been shifted over a period of decades so that suddenly, or so it seems, people accept an incorrect premise. I suspect that many people know something is wrong, but cannot put their finger on what. Case in point. What's the first thing you think of when you think of freedom? Most people will immediately think of the right to do whatever they want. On the left, it's the ability to do as they please with their genitals and, quote, reproductive freedom. I call it killing defenseless unborn babies, but whatever. And that's a little more political than I usually get on this show. This was a political blog, so you'll have to just go with it. The right fights just as vigorously for keeping others from interfering with their guns and funds. Both argue on the basis of individual liberty. Both argue what Guinness calls negative freedom. While negative freedom is important, it's only half the equation. Negative freedom must be paired with positive freedom in order to work and, more importantly, to last. Guinness does us a tremendous service by reviving this more robust view of freedom. He writes, positive freedom is freedom for, in essence, freedom for excellence, according to whatever vision and ideals define that excellence. Genuine liberty goes well beyond stopping interference into allowing people to succeed or fail based on their own ambition and abilities. In other words, positive freedom is the freedom afforded by opportunity. That's why the United States used to be called the land of opportunity. When was the last time you heard anyone say that? Political correctness has attacked the very idea of opportunity for all to succeed or fail. We hand out trophies to everyone regardless of the outcome of the games because our kids are too small to fail. Businesses are too big to fail. The spectrum between is littered with thousands of examples where political correctness has stripped opportunity in the name of fairness, and it's terribly unfair to us all. It's the opposite of liberty. Guinness convinced me of that. Read through A Free People's Suicide, and you will wonder, how do we get our liberty back? What would it take for Americans to reject the bad medicine they've been spoon-fed for the last 100 years to restore freedom? The answer lies in what Guinness calls the Golden Triangle of Freedom. The Golden Triangle of Freedom is freedom, virtue, and faith. Each of the three depends on the others, and they go around like the recycling triangle ad infinitum. Take a look at those three things and ask yourself which of them is still celebrated in America. Once freedom is defined as the lack of any constraint, then virtue and faith become viewed as unnecessary personal constraints and are done away with as quickly as possible. So popular culture attacks virtue as old-fashioned and faith as blind. All the while, it is freedom that is eroding away. Here, Guinness makes a point that both startled me and ultimately changed my mind. We conservatives are prone to thinking that the rule of law is there to protect liberty, thus our constant appeals to the Constitution. So what happens when someone violates the Constitution and usurps it? The answer is nothing. The Constitution is merely a piece of paper. It Defense of liberty requires people willing to stand up for it. It takes men and women in each branch of government willing to work within the limits of their power. Without such men and women, liberty is a mirage. That's what my friend was trying to tell me all along. I believed that the First Amendment would always be there to protect religious speech. It may always stand as a testament to the ideal, but if men and women who do not agree with my worldview hold the reins of power in the legislatures and executive offices of this fair land, it is entirely conceivable that they could vote to limit the freedom of religious speech in the name of, quote, fairness or, quote, equality or some other tyranny in freedom's clothing. Stack the courts with people of similar persuasion, and there really is no hope. Guinness, though, does not allow his reader to despair. He rings the constant refrain, unless. Hope is gone, unless people can be shown the better way, shown from history how to avert this future. And this is where my heart begins to beat again. There is one hope for America. It starts with the faith leg of the Golden Triangle. To put it more bluntly than Guinness does, what America needs is revival, a complete and overwhelming return to God in our values and beliefs. Without revival, America is in trouble as values erode. Most Americans do not know that revival has broken out in America almost every 50 years. By that standard, we're overdue. I'm not a numbers guy, so I won't read into the lack of revival in our day, except to say that I wonder sometimes if God tarries in pouring out the Spirit because we do not ask Him for it. What are we afraid of? Losing our liberty to do as we please? Maybe. But I think that's coming either way. I'd rather be free to serve my spirit-pricked conscience than bound to serve the nanny state. Guinness is absolutely spot on with a message Americans need to hear. Still, I disagree with him on U.S. foreign policy and the way the United States was perceived during the Iraq War. I will always believe there were good reasons to go into Iraq, and one day this will be understood more fully, at which time world opinion, whatever that is, will be proved wrong. Guinness uses that war as an example of American hubris and as an illustration to prove America can do better, as an example of freedom to the world. That liberty cannot be superimposed is obvious. Whether America's presence in Iraq was for the purpose of imposing an American way or liberating others is still a matter of dispute. The historians will decide, and let's hope a conservative or two gets the upper hand. Books can haunt you. A Free People's Suicide is a challenging read that will stir you to think about America's future and what role you might play in it. It's worth every page if it wards off the ghost of naivete future. Well, so that's my book review. Hopefully some of my political opinions don't turn you guys off. Here's the thing. Here's what I want to just share with you about how this book changed the way I think. And it was buried in there. It was this idea that virtue is important in a constitutional republic like we have. If nobody is there to stand up and say, no, you cannot do that, even at the highest levels of power, then that piece of paper called the Constitution doesn't mean a thing. And so I started to think about, well, how do we change people's hearts? Because, guys, evangelicals spent the better part of the 90s and the early 2000s trying to change laws. And a good chunk of those were swept away with one Supreme Court decision. A lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort swept away with one opinion. And it made me wonder, like, is all that worth it? Was all that really valuable? You know, we felt like maybe we were part of a righteous cause. And all of that came up to basically nothing. Because the character of really 5 people mattered more than whatever the law said that was passed. So I started to think about, well, how can I change character? What do people need to hear, need to do, need to read in order to have their character changed. And that's how ultimately I settled on I want to tell stories. I want to tell not just stories about, just anything, but people's stories about life with God. And I want you to hear a chance. I want you to have a chance to hear that God is alive, that God is working, and that He will work and is working in your life. Because I believe that as that happens, as you become convinced of that, you'll be able to see Him more clearly. You'll be able to understand and trust Him more deeply. Those are the things that I'm after. So, I'm not one of these people who's going to tell you on Independence Day that the real independence is freedom from sin and through Jesus. I mean, that's nice. That's fine. You'll probably hear that. But what I think is more important is understanding what's happening in our culture and how, as Christians, we interact with it. Um, maybe, just maybe, preaching and writing editorials and doing all that. Somebody needs to do those things. But maybe there's other ways that you can interject faith, interject character and virtue to the conversation that doesn't have anything to do with preaching or telling people what to do or theology. Maybe there's another way. So, on this 4th of July, I hope you guys have a great time. Don't blow anything up. Don't hurt yourselves. Enjoy yourself. Celebrate freedom and think about where God might have you go to help encourage true and deep character in our land. All right, guys. Hey, have a great 4th of July. We'll catch you next week. Until then, keep the faith.